The ocean doesn't hate you. It doesn't even know you exist. In December of 2024, a 61-year-old fisherman named Maximo Napa Castro left Peru for what should have been a routine trip. But then, a massive storm hit. It destroyed his engine, wiped out his navigation, and severed his connection to the entire world. For 95 days, he was completely alone, adrift on the vast open ocean. How did he survive? By collecting rainwater, eating raw fish he caught with his bare hands, and holding on to an unbreakable faith even as his body started to give out. The Pacific Ocean did everything it could to swallow him whole, to make him just another mystery of the deep. But he refused to disappear. He fought back, and he returned. Let's dive into his incredible story of survival against all odds. True story. The ocean was calm that morning. Not because it was kind, but because it had not yet chosen to reveal itself. Along Peru's southern coast, dawn broke with a quiet authority. The sky slowly transitioned from black to steel blue, and the first light touched the water like a blade laid gently across glass. The air smelled of salt, wet rope, and diesel, an unmistakable scent that belonged to working men and coastal mornings. And in that thin, pale light, Maximo Gatton Napa Castro moved with the familiar discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime learning what the ocean demands. He was 61 years old. At an age when most people measure their days in comfort and routine, Maximo still measured life in tide, wind, and distance. His hands were roughened by decades of pulling nets, hauling lines, balancing the unpredictability of the sea against the needs of home. His body carried the kind of quiet strength that doesn't come from the gym. It comes from survival as employment. This trip was not an adventure, not a challenge, not a gamble. It was work. A fishing run. Short, manageable, familiar. The kind of journey he had made so many times that it no longer carried drama in the mind. It carried only steps. Fuel, nets, lines, hooks, food, water, a few personal items, and that most dangerous thing a person can carry into nature, confidence. Not arrogance, not recklessness, just that steady belief a veteran gains after years of coming home alive. The belief that knowledge can tame chaos, that experience can negotiate with the sea. But the ocean does not negotiate, it only waits. On the shore, other fishermen moved like shadows between boats. There were murmured greetings, small nods, men speaking in the shorthand of shared hardship. Somewhere nearby, metal clinked against wood. A gull called once, sharp and impatient, then fell silent. Maximo checked his equipment with practiced eyes. Every rope had a purpose, every knot had a memory, every tool had earned its place. He ran his hand along the side of the boat, an almost affectionate gesture, like a man touching the shoulder of an old partner. The vessel was modest, weathered, built for function more than comfort. It had no luxury, no safety guarantees. It offered only one promise. If you respect the sea, it might let you pass. Maximo stepped on board. The boat shifted beneath him, adjusting to his weight the way a living thing adjusts to being ridden. The engine coughed to life, first reluctant, then steady. That sound to men like Maximo was not just mechanical. It was reassurance. It was companionship. It was control. On land, control is assumed. At sea, control is borrowed. As the boat eased away from shore, the coastline began to shrink, not suddenly, slowly. The buildings became shapes, the shapes became lines. The lines became a thin promise that separated the human world from the ocean's vast jurisdiction. The horizon widened. Maximo stood with the posture of someone who had done this thousands of times, eyes scanning the water, not romantically, but professionally. He watched the surface for subtle cues. The texture of the waves, the wind's direction, small signs that lesser men wouldn't notice. The Pacific was quiet, but quiet doesn't mean safe. In nature, quiet is often just preparation. He pointed the boat outward. The engine held steady, and for a brief moment, everything felt exactly as it always had. A man, a boat, a job to do, and nothing else. The ocean looked open, almost inviting. But that is the ocean's oldest illusion. Because while Maximo was heading out to fish, Something else was already moving toward him. Not a creature, not a ship. A system. A shift in pressure. A swelling of wind. A storm forming somewhere beyond sight. The kind of storm that doesn't announce itself with thunder at first, but with silence that grows heavier by the hour. Maximo didn't know it yet, but this was the final morning of his normal life. This was the last time the sea would allow him to believe that experience was enough. He continued forward, leaving the shore behind like a memory. And as Peru faded into distance, the Pacific expanded into dominance, vast, patient, and unreadable. Maximo Gatton Napa Castro was a working fisherman leaving for a routine trip, but the ocean had already rewritten the story, and that was only the beginning. At first it didn't feel like danger. That was the cruelty of it. The Pacific doesn't always begin with violence. Sometimes it begins with subtle disobedience, small changes so ordinary they could be dismissed as mood, not menace. The first sign was the wind, not strong, just different. It stopped feeling like a passing breeze and started feeling like a direction, a steady push against the natural order of things. The air became colder than it should have been. It carried a faint metallic taste, the way the atmosphere changes before heavy weather, as if the sky is loading itself like a weapon. Maximo noticed. Men like him always notice. He had learned long ago that the ocean doesn't send warnings in words. It sends them in texture, in pressure, in the way a wave rises half a second too late, or breaks half a second too early. And now the water was behaving differently. The surface lost its softness. The waves became less playful and more deliberate, rolling in heavier sets, as though something vast beneath was shifting position. The horizon still looked clean, the sky still looked open, but the sea was beginning to speak. Maximo adjusted course, a normal correction, routine, then another, then another. The boat wasn't holding the same line. It was drifting sideways, pulled by a force that didn't show itself, and the more he resisted it, the more he felt the truth tightening around him. This wasn't a normal day anymore. Still, he continued, because fishermen don't run home at the first rough water. They adapt, they endure. That's the profession. And Maximo had built his life on something stronger than fear, familiarity. But familiarity can become a trap. The wind strengthened slowly, like a hand closing into a fist. Whitecaps began to form more often. The sunlight dimmed, not because the sun disappeared, but because something translucent started building in the sky. A veil. The clouds didn't arrive like a wall. They arrived like pressure, stacking layer upon layer, thickening the air, lowering the ceiling of the world. The blue above him narrowed into a strip, then a patch, then a memory, and the temperature dropped again. Maximo checked his equipment, his engine, his lines. Everything still worked. And that was the most dangerous phase of all, when you can still pretend you're safe. The boat rose and fell, more sharply now. Not violent yet, but insistent, like the ocean was tapping on the hull and asking, "Are you paying attention?" He had seen storms before. He'd respected storms before, but there are storms that are weather and storms that are systems. What was forming out there wasn't just rain. It was a rearrangement of power. The wind shifted again, harder this time. It came in gusts that slapped at the boat's side, making it shudder. The water darkened slightly, turning from reflective blue to deep slate. And then the ocean's tone changed completely. The waves grew taller, not in isolated peaks but in coordinated sets, rolling toward him like marching bodies. The boat began to climb them, laboring upward, then dropped down the other side with a jolt that vibrated through his legs and spine. Salt spray hit his face, then again, then constantly. Soon his lips were crusted with it. His clothes felt damp, then wet, then heavy. Maximo's eyes narrowed against the sting. His hands tightened around the controls. He leaned into the movement, adjusting posture instinctively, balancing himself like a man who knows that one wrong step can turn routine into tragedy. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low sound, almost like the ocean itself growling under its breath. Maximo looked toward the clouds. They were darker now, not just gray, iron. The kind of cloud that doesn't drift. It advances. He made another course correction, aiming for what he thought would be a safer line, a way to skirt the worst of it. But storms do not have edges when you are small enough, and Maximo's boat, strong as it was still a speck. This is what people misunderstand about the sea. They imagine the ocean as a place you travel through. But the truth is simpler and colder. You don't travel through the ocean. The ocean travels over you. The wind rose again, and this time it didn't feel like weather. It felt like force. The boat began pitching more aggressively. Each wave slapped the hull with sharper intent. Water pooled where it shouldn't. The engine whined under strain. The sound of it changed, subtle but to Maximo's ears unmistakable. Struggling, he checked the sky again. The light was fading even though it wasn't night. The clouds had thickened into a canopy that made the world feel smaller and more claustrophobic, like the sea was closing in from above and below. And then it happened, quietly, deceptively. A moment of stillness, a breath. The wind paused for half a second, like the world inhaled. Maximo felt it, that unnatural calm. Every veteran knows it. A storm doesn't always begin with impact. Sometimes it begins with silence, the final polite warning before brutality. Maximo steadied his stance. He tightened his grip. He told himself what all skilled men tell themselves in the face of chaos. Stay calm, stay sharp, don't panic, handle it. But the ocean doesn't care how calm you are. Because storms aren't personal. They're not angry. They are indifferent. And indifference is the most lethal emotion in nature. The first truly large wave hit soon after. Not enormous, but forceful enough to slam the boat sideways, forcing Maximo to fight the wheel. The hull groaned, the engine sputtered, only briefly. But it was enough to send a cold thought through his chest. If the engine fails out here... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because men who work the sea understand one brutal equation better than anyone else. No engine means no direction. No direction means no control. No control means the ocean decides. Maximo looked out again. Nothing but water. Nothing but gray sky. No land, no ships, no help. Only wind, building, and waves, rising, and an ocean that had begun tightening its grip around him. The sky was closing in, and Maximo, for the first time, wasn't just watching weather. He was witnessing a trap being constructed in real time, because this wasn't the storm yet. This was only the door slowly shutting. And then everything changed. There are moments in life where everything still looks the same. The same sky, the same sea, the same boat beneath your feet. But the rules have already changed. Maximo felt that change before he could name it. The storm no longer circled him like distant threat. It was now inside his world, wrapped around him in wind and spray, reducing the horizon to a tight, trembling ring. The Pacific had become a moving architecture of slate water and violent air. Waves rose like dark shoulders and collapsed with the weight of collapsing buildings. The boat climbed, dipped, climbed again, each rise stealing breath, each descent punching it back out. And the sound of the storm was total. Wind tearing across the water with the hiss of something alive, the smack of waves against wood and metal, the low grind of the hull being battered, the engine struggling to keep its rhythm. It was still running, but now every vibration felt like a countdown. Maximo's clothes were soaked through, his hands burned from salt and friction. His eyes narrowed against the spray, scanning for any sign, anything land, another vessel, a break in the storm. But the ocean offered nothing. It never does. It only offers more ocean. He pulled the controls again, trying to keep the bow facing the oncoming waves. It was the one tactic that kept small boats from being turned sideways and rolled. Bow into the wave, fight it head-on, keep direction, keep control. But control was becoming theoretical. The boat slammed down hard, too hard, and Maximo felt something in the machinery shift. A new tremor passed through the deck, subtle but wrong, like the boat had flinched internally. Then the engine coughed. Not a full stop. Just a choking stumble. like a man taking water into his lungs. Maximo's head snapped down. He listened. He didn't just hear the engine. He read it, like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. The rhythm was off. The next wave hit, larger than the ones before. It rose out of the gray like punishment and cracked against the front of the boat, throwing spray over him in a freezing sheet. The deck flooded for a moment. Water ran into places it shouldn't. Maximo moved fast, shifting his weight, bracing himself, doing what he had always done, what he'd trained his body to do without thought. But the storm was evolving. It was escalating. This wasn't a storm anymore. This was a takeover. And then, in a single violent sequence, the ocean made its move. A wave struck at an angle, wrong angle, catching the side of the boat, slamming it with enough force to throw Maximo's balance off. He reached for support, gripping a rail, but the boat pitched again and something below deck answered with a brutal metallic complaint. The engine screamed, then sputtered. Maximo punched the controls, trying to keep it alive. The engine coughed again, a second time, a third, and then silence. Not the gentle kind, the terrifying kind. Because the silence didn't mean peace, it meant power had left. The wind still screamed, the waves still struck, the rain still fell like needles. But the one sound that mattered, the sound that meant direction, movement, escape, was gone. Maximo stared down at the dead machinery for a fraction of a second, as if disbelief could restart it. It didn't. He tried again. Nothing. He checked, adjusted, fought with controls that suddenly felt useless, like steering a corpse. Still nothing. In that moment, something changed inside him. A fisherman can survive rough weather. A fisherman can survive hunger. A fisherman can survive exhaustion. But in open ocean, an engine is not convenience. It is life. Without it, the boat became what nature always wanted it to be, a floating object. And the Pacific has no mercy for floating objects. Maximo's breathing quickened. Not panic yet, but the start of it. The mind reaching for solutions at high speed, like fingers searching through darkness. He went to the radio. Salt water had soaked everything. The wind had sandblasted the boat with spray. He tried to send a signal. He tried again. Nothing. If there was power, it was unstable. If there was transmission, it wasn't reaching anyone. He adjusted. He slapped at buttons with wet hands. He leaned in, desperate to hear even a crackle, any sound from another human being. Only static. Only emptiness. The storm had not only taken his engine, it had taken his voice. Now he was what the ocean loves most, a man without connection, a man without direction, a man without witness. Maximo stepped back, and for the first time the storm did not feel like weather. It felt like imprisonment. He looked outward again. The sky was a thick lid of darkness. The sea was chaos. There was no meaningful east or west anymore, no landmark, no path, only waves, and the invisible force of wind and current deciding where he would go. And then came the true horror. Because when the engine dies, it's not simply a problem, it's an identity crisis. Maximo realized he wasn't traveling anymore. He wasn't a fisherman out at sea. He was something else now. He was a missing man. Somewhere far away on land, time would continue. People would talk. The days would pass. The search, if there was one, would be limited by fuel, by budgets, by probability. And probability is the ocean's strongest ally, because the sea does not need to kill you quickly. It only needs to make you hard to find. The boat rose and fell. With no engine, each wave turned the vessel slightly, nudging it like a piece of debris. The wind seized the body of the boat and began to push. Maximo could feel it. Movement without permission. And in that moment, the Pacific stopped being a workplace. It became a machine, a vast conveyor belt of water and air. Maximo tried to anchor himself psychologically. He forced his mind into procedure. What do I have? How much water? What food remains? What can I salvage? Because when rescue becomes uncertain, survival becomes arithmetic. But arithmetic doesn't stop fear. It only organizes it. And fear now arrived in layers. First, I might not be found today. Then, I might not be found this week. Then, what if I'm never found at all? Maximo looked up to the sky, dark and endless, and a thought entered him that was not dramatic, not poetic, but brutally simple. This storm doesn't have to kill me. It only has to keep me. The boat drifted again. Another involuntary turn. Maximo grabbed the rail and steadied himself, his body tense, his mind trying not to fracture. But deep down, he understood what had just happened. The ocean had taken the steering wheel of his life. The storm had crossed him over a line no fisherman wants to cross, a line beyond which skill becomes irrelevant and survival becomes a trial of endurance and meaning. This was the point of no return. The moment after which the story is no longer about fishing. It is about one question that the Pacific would ask him every day for the next 3 months. How badly do you want to live? And that was only the beginning. When the engine died, time stopped behaving normally. On land, hours have structure. They come with predictable noises, voices, traffic, doors opening and closing, the rhythm of human life. But out here, drifting on the Pacific, time became something else. A blank surface, a repeating horizon, a slow, indifferent countdown. Maximo Gatton, Napa Castro, stood in a boat that no longer obeyed him, watching the storm move past like a monster that had finished feeding, leaving him behind not as a survivor, but as leftover. The sea was still unsettled. The wind still had teeth, but the most violent part of the storm began to loosen its grip, and that's when the real terror arrived. Because the storm was not the enemy that would kill him. The storm was only the event that removed his tools. What would kill him now was quieter. The system that governs all open water survival begins with a brutal truth. You can go weeks without food. You cannot go long without water. Maximo knew that. Every fisherman knows that. Yet knowing a truth does not soften it when it becomes personal. Water. He lowered himself onto the deck and began to inventory his world like a man counting the last seconds of a burning building. What do I have? What is safe? What is usable? What is already lost? He checked containers, checked supplies, checked whatever he could salvage from the chaos the storm had left behind. Food, some, not enough, but something. Equipment, limited. The boat, damaged, directionless, but still floating. Then came the crucial category, water. This wasn't comfort anymore. This wasn't stay hydrated. This was survival in its purest form. Water would decide whether he lived long enough to be found. He checked what remained. It wasn't much, and suddenly the Pacific looked different. The same ocean that surrounded him with endless water was now a mockery. Because salt water is not water. Salt water is poison. Drink it and you don't quench thirst. You accelerate death. That's the ocean's cruelest trick. It gives you a world of water and denies you a single safe mouthful. Maximo sat back and stared out. The sky was clearing in places, but the sun, when it returned, did not feel like salvation. It felt like punishment. Because sun means heat, heat means sweat, sweat means dehydration, and dehydration is not immediate. It is a slow theft. It begins as discomfort, then dizziness, then weakness, then confusion, then collapse. The body doesn't announce the moment it crosses the line. It simply stops cooperating. Maximo understood all of that, and so his first strategy was not heroism. It was discipline. He rationed, carefully, coldly, a few sips, then stop. He forced himself to swallow without satisfaction, like a man tasting survival. He knew if he drank to comfort, he would be dead in days. So he drank to endure. And then came the next problem. Even if he rationed, his water wouldn't last, which meant he needed the sky. Out here, rain was not weather. Rain was a currency. Rain meant another day. So Maximo began preparing for something that sounds simple but is, in this context, a life and death craft, catching rain. He positioned anything that could hold water. A container, a cut plastic surface, cloth, even improvised catches made from the limited items around him. He thought like a man building an emergency system from scraps. Because he wasn't just surviving the ocean, He was surviving the absence of infrastructure, the absence of civilization. Nature was the supply chain now, and nature does not deliver on schedule. The first time rain came, it didn't arrive like a gentle blessing. It arrived abruptly, short and chaotic, like the sky tossing him a handful of coins and daring him to catch them before they hit the deck and vanished into the sea. Maximo moved quickly, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from urgency. He held out containers, tilted surfaces, guided runoff, watched precious droplets gather. And when he drank that rainwater, it tasted like life. Clean, soft, almost unreal. Soft, almost unreal. For a moment, the fear in his chest loosened, not because he felt safe, but because he felt possible. The next threat was the sun. As days passed, the next threat was the sun. As days passed, the Pacific changed faces. The storm was gone, but the sky did not turn kind. It turned bright, unforgiving, an enormous blue dome that magnified the heat and reflected it back from the water's surface. Maximo had no shade, no shelter, no escape. The sunlight pressed down on his skin until it burned. His lips cracked. His eyes narrowed constantly, strained against glare. The boat became an oven during the day and a cold metal coffin by night. That was the second system of suffering. Heat steals water and cold steals strength. Every night the temperature dropped, the wind cooled, his wet clothes chilled him. Sleep came in fragments. His body trembled trying to conserve warmth. And in the dark, the mind begins to misbehave. Thoughts repeat. Fear loops. The loneliness arrives not as sadness but as pressure, the sensation that the world has forgotten you. Maximo looked up at the stars. They were beautiful in the way danger sometimes is, pure, indifferent, unreachable. He had navigated by them before, when the engine worked, when direction existed. Now the stars were not guides, they were witnesses. He spoke out loud sometimes, not because he expected an answer, but because silence out here is too heavy to carry alone. Dios, he whispered at least once. God, not as a dramatic cry, as a private admission, a man saying what he cannot say to anyone else. Because survival doesn't begin with bravery. It begins with acceptance, the acceptance that you are alone, that your body is fragile, that the ocean is larger than your story. By the end of the first days adrift, Maximo understood something with startling clarity. He was no longer in a crisis. He was now in a process. A daily system where the main objective was not to escape. The main objective was to stay alive until chance arrives. And chance in open ocean is rare. It depends on visibility, on routes, on timing, on another vessel being close enough to see a small boat on an infinite surface. It depends on improbable alignment. So Maximo made his first true survival vow, not spoken to a crowd, not written down, just formed in the quiet core of a man refusing to disappear. I will not waste water. I will not waste strength. I will survive today. Because out here, survival is not won in months. It is won in hours. You don't survive the Pacific by thinking about March. You survive the Pacific by fighting for the next sunrise. And as Maximo sat under that burning sky, cradling rainwater like treasure, he did not yet know the full shape of what was coming. But he felt it. The ocean had not finished with him, not even close, but this was only the beginning. Hunger doesn't arrive like an emergency. It arrives like a whisper, a tightening in the stomach, a hollow sensation behind the ribs, a background ache that seems manageable at first, until it becomes the loudest thing in your entire body. In the beginning, Maximo still had food. Not much, but enough to create the illusion of a short crisis. A few supplies packed for a routine fishing run, items meant to last days, maybe weeks, not months. He ate carefully, rationing like a man who understood the mathematics of survival. Small amounts, slow bites, no waste. But the ocean is patient. It doesn't take everything at once. It waits until you've done all the responsible things. And then it introduces the problem that discipline cannot solve. Time. Days passed. Then more days. The boat drifted and rocked under shifting skies, pushed by wind and current like an object without rights. The sun pressed down with relentless force, bleaching the world into glare. At night, the cold returned, and the boat's wet surfaces became cruel to touch, metal that stole warmth, wood that held dampness. And as the calendar in his mind lost clarity, another clock remained brutally accurate. The clock inside his body. His food ran low, then lower, and then it was gone. That was the moment the story changed again. Because when food disappears, the survival narrative stops being about endurance and becomes about transformation. Maximo was still surrounded by life. Seabirds cut across the horizon like scattered punctuation marks. Fish flickered beneath the surface, shadows moving in the blue. Insects clung to debris that drifted past. The ocean was not empty, but it was not generous either. It offered life the way a tyrant offers mercy, with conditions. For Maximo, the offer was simple. Eat what you can catch, or become part of what feeds others. He began with what made sense: fishing line, hook, patience. A fisherman does not forget the motions even when starving. His hands were trained for this, the steadiness, the timing, the tension in the line. When he caught small fish, there was a momentary victory. Not joy, never joy, but relief. Protein, energy, more time. But there was another problem. Without fire, without fuel, without tools for cooking, he had to eat it raw. At first, he hesitated. The mind revolts, the stomach tightens. The taste is metallic, alien. Raw fish is not food the way humans imagine food. It is survival in its most primitive form, wet, cold, and unforgiving. Still, he ate, because hunger will rewire morality. Hunger is one of the few forces on Earth that can strip away civilization in silence. Then, as the days deepened into weeks, the fish were no longer guaranteed. The ocean does not promise consistency. Some days the line yielded nothing. Some nights the water stayed quiet, as if the Pacific itself was withholding. Those were the worst days. Not because of pain, but because of uncertainty. You can endure suffering, but uncertainty fractures the mind. And so Maximo widened the definition of what he could eat. He turned to insects. Tiny, drifting, opportunistic life that landed on the boat or clung to floating fragments. It's almost humiliating in a human sense, an adult man reduced to collecting the smallest creatures for sustenance. But humiliation is a luxury. Out here, pride doesn't feed you. So he ate what he could. And then came the line he never expected to cross. A turtle. The first time it appeared, it was almost surreal. An ancient creature surfacing near his drifting boat, calm and slow, moving through the water as if the storm that destroyed his life had never happened. For a second, Maximo watched it with something close to reverence. Turtles have lived through centuries of human history. They have crossed oceans without engines, without maps, without fear. Then hunger spoke, not like a suggestion, like a command. He reached, caught it, pulled it in. There is no romantic version of what happened next, because survival isn't always inspiring. Sometimes it is brutal, sometimes it is ugly. Sometimes it forces a man to do what he will later struggle to explain, even to himself. He killed the turtle, and without fire, without salt, without preparation, he ate it raw. The texture was wrong. The taste was worse. His stomach fought him, his throat tightened. Every instinct screamed, "This is not what you are supposed to do." But instinct doesn't understand drift. Instinct doesn't understand 95 days. Maximo swallowed. And in that moment, the ocean achieved something it always tries to achieve with the human species. It pushed him backward in time. Not intellectually, not emotionally, physically. He was no longer eating like a man. He was eating like an animal. And yet, he remained human, because the pain of it wasn't just in his mouth. It was in his mind. In the quiet afterward, when the blood was washed from his hands by seawater, and the boat continued drifting as if nothing had occurred, Maximo sat down and stared at the horizon. There are moments where survival feels like victory. This did not feel like victory. This felt like compromise, a trade, a contract with nature. And the contract was clear. If you want to keep living, you must keep taking life. That thought haunted him. Because Maximo wasn't a man raised for violence. He was a fisherman, yes, but fishing has rules, ritual, purpose. This felt different, this felt desperate, and desperation changes the soul. The next days became a cycle. Search, catch, eat, conserve, search again. Every morning began with the same question. Will the ocean feed me today? And every day ended with a darker question. What will I have to do if it doesn't? His body began to change. Weight fell from him. Muscles softened. His cheeks hollowed. His movement slowed, even as his will sharpened. The hunger made everything more intense. The sun brighter, the cold colder, the smell of salt stronger, the sound of waves louder. And worst of all, the hunger made memories louder too. He remembered home, familiar voices, warm food, water he never had to earn, small comforts that now felt like lost civilizations. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes when you realize how fragile normal life truly is, how easily it can be ripped away, not by war, not by betrayal, but by weather. Maximo began to understand the Pacific not as scenery, but as a system, an environment that forces you into choices you never imagined. He was living inside the ocean's logic now, and the ocean's logic is not human. It does not care about dignity. It does not care about hope. It only asks one question: can you adapt fast enough? And Maximo did. But adaptation has a cost. Because every time he ate raw life to stay alive, he wasn't just feeding his body. He was paying tribute to the sea. And the sea, always indifferent, always massive, accepted the tribute without gratitude. Then it drifted him onward, further, longer, into a future where the hardest battles wouldn't be fought with hooks or hands, but inside his own mind. And then everything changed. The most terrifying force in the ocean is not the wave you can see. It is the one you cannot, because some dangers don't announce themselves with impact. Some dangers work like theft, quiet, patient, invisible. By the time Maximo began to understand what was happening, the damage was already done. The days had started to blur. Not because he had lost intelligence, but because the Pacific had begun applying its oldest psychological weapon: repetition. Every sunrise looked like the last. Every sunset fell like a curtain onto the same stage. Water, sky, salt. Water, sky, salt. But something was wrong, something subtle enough that most people would never notice it until it was fatal. The boat wasn't simply drifting, it was traveling. Not by intention, not by navigation, but by current. The ocean had become a conveyor belt, a moving system of invisible rivers inside the sea, carrying him with a slow determination that felt almost strategic. No engine, no rudder control that mattered, no ability to choose a direction. Maximo was not a captain anymore. He was cargo. At first, he still tried to fight it. Instinct demanded it. The human brain cannot accept passive helplessness without protest. He adjusted what he could. He used makeshift steering, shifting weight, positioning the boat, trying to angle it with wind and wave. But within minutes he realized the truth. This was like trying to steer a leaf in a flood. The Pacific was too large, its forces too deep, its mechanisms too old. You could battle the surface all you want, but the current beneath does not care. And as the weeks continued, the ocean performed a cruel trick on his mind. It hid movement beneath sameness. He felt stuck because the view didn't change, but distance was being stolen from him every hour. In a normal life, distance is measurable. Roads, miles, landmarks, signs. Out here there were no signs, only the slow erasure of location. He began to observe the sky with more intensity. The stars, the placement of the moon, the sun's path, the direction of wind. A fisherman's mind becomes a compass when technology fails. And gradually, a terrifying recognition formed in him. Quietly, painfully, he was no longer near his starting point. He was being pulled away. Not a little, not casually, relentlessly. This wasn't random drift, this was a system. And systems are dangerous because they don't feel emotional. They don't feel violent. They don't feel personal. They simply work. That was twist number one, not the storm, not the starvation, not the raw survival. The twist was geometry. The ocean wasn't holding him in place while rescue searched nearby. It was carrying him into a wider and wider circle of impossibility. Every day he survived. He was also becoming harder to find. That is the cruel mathematics of open water survival. Time is not just endurance. Time is also distance. And distance is also disappearance. Maximo understood what this meant. On land, if anyone was looking for him, they would search a region near where he last should have been. Maybe an arc, maybe a grid, maybe a coastline. But that kind of search depends on one assumption, that the missing person stays near the missing point. The Pacific was destroying that assumption. If he was moving, quietly, invisibly, then every hour made rescue less likely. A boat is small. A man is smaller. The ocean is infinite. Maximo was not just surviving nature, he was surviving probability. The boat continued to rock under the sun. The salt air dried his skin and cracked his lips. His hands grew raw. His stomach tightened with constant hunger. But it was the discovery of drift that truly chilled him. Because hunger can be solved if you catch something. Thirst can be solved if rain comes. But drift? Drift means that even if you stay alive, you may still never be found. He began watching the horizon with a new fear. Not fear of death, but fear of endlessness. Fear of months passing. Fear of drifting into regions where ships rarely cross. He stared at empty water until his eyes ached. Sometimes he saw shapes that weren't real. Dark silhouettes that dissolved into cloud shadow. Sometimes he thought he saw boats, only for them to become waves. The mind will create hope when the world refuses to provide it. And that is where the ocean becomes truly dangerous. Not in its physical violence, but in the way it reshapes the brain. Maximo started marking time, not with a calendar, but with ritual. Morning, check the sky, check for rain, check for life in the water, check the boat's condition. Midday, protect from sun, conserve energy. Evening, prepare for cold, pray. Night, endure the silence. These rituals weren't just practical, they were psychological anchors, because in a world where you cannot control direction, you must control something, anything, or your mind begins to collapse. Still, the drift continued. The current stole days the way a thief steals money. Quietly, one unit at a time, until suddenly your entire life is gone. Maximo had no map, but he could feel the distance in his body, the way the air changed, the way the sea behaved, the way the wind carried different coldness at night. He was being taken somewhere, and he didn't know where. That not knowing is its own form of torture. Because uncertainty is not simply unpleasant, it is corrosive. It eats away at your future. It turns planning into guessing. It turns hope into fragile imagination. And the ocean loves fragile imagination. At some point, Maximo stopped thinking in terms of getting back. Instead, he started thinking in terms of being seen. Not rescued, not saved, just seen. Because to be seen is to exist again. To be seen is to re-enter human reality. But the Pacific is not designed for being seen. It is designed for swallowing. He stood in the boat one evening, sun sinking into a bruised horizon, and he realized the full weight of it. The storm didn't just break his engine. It delivered him into the machinery of the sea, a moving belt of currents, pushing him onward, outward, away. And as the last light faded, Maximo whispered something that was not prayer and not despair, but the truth stripped naked. I am going farther. Further than searchers would think, further than his own mind could properly hold, further into the Pacific's jurisdiction, where the ocean doesn't need to kill you, it only needs to keep you drifting long enough for the world to stop looking. Maximo held the rail with salt-cracked hands and stared into the darkening water. Because now he understood the storm was not the main antagonist. The current was, a silent, unstoppable force carrying him away from every human certainty. And the worst part was this: he was still alive, which meant the ocean still had time to finish the job. But this was only the beginning. The body can endure horrors, but the mind is where the ocean truly kills you. Because out here, on a drifting boat that no longer belongs to you, survival is not only physical, it is psychological warfare. It is the slow dismantling of certainty, the systematic removal of everything that makes a human being feel human. No streets, no voices, no timekeeping, no borders, only water, only wind, only the same horizon staring back like a blank expression. By the time Maximo entered this chapter of his ordeal, hunger had already hollowed him. Sun and salt had already worn his skin raw. His body had become leaner, sharper, more fragile, an instrument stretched tight by need. But it wasn't the hunger that frightened him most anymore. It was what hunger began to do to his thoughts. Days had become indistinguishable. The sun rose, burned him, then left. Night came, chilled him, then left. Each cycle repeated with such brutal sameness that time stopped feeling like a line and became a loop, like he was trapped inside an endless circle of suffering, and the Pacific reinforced this feeling at every level. The waves never stopped moving, the wind never stopped speaking, the boat never stopped creaking. The ocean gave him no silence, except the silence of human absence. That is the silence that breaks people. At first, Maximo spoke only when necessary. A fisherman speaking to himself is not unusual. Short comments, small checks, practical words. Rope, water, line. It's a way to keep the mind aligned with task. But as isolation deepened, his words changed. They became longer, more emotional, less anchored to reality. He began speaking not to track tasks, but to fight the feeling that he was fading. Because loneliness in open water does not feel like sadness. It feels like erasure. It feels like the world is moving forward without you while you drift in a private universe with no witnesses. And humans are not built for witnessless suffering. We are social creatures. Our identity is reflected back by other faces, other voices. When that reflection disappears, the mind begins to fill the void with memory, imagination, or hallucination. Maximo started talking to God more, not in grand speeches, but in fragments, in pleas, in small statements that sounded like a man negotiating with the sky. Señor, please, not like this. Sometimes he spoke the names of people he loved. Sometimes he spoke to his boat as if it were alive, as if the vessel could choose to protect him if only he addressed it gently. At night, the stars appeared like ancient eyes. They did not comfort him. They watched him. And when the wind rose and the boat rocked violently in darkness, he began to understand the deeper shape of his situation. A human being alone at sea does not just fear death. He fears madness. Because madness is what the ocean wants. Madness is surrender before the body fully collapses. As his strength waned, his senses sharpened and distorted at the same time. He began noticing tiny details with painful clarity. The salt crust forming on rope, the way water beads on metal, the exact pitch of the boat's creak when it shifted. But then there were other details his brain started inventing. A shape on the horizon that vanished as he stared longer. A voice in the wind that almost sounded like words. A knock that wasn't there. He would blink hard and shake his head as if that could shake reality back into place. But the ocean is not just a physical place. It is a psychological machine. It isolates you, it exhausts you, it starves you, it dehydrates you. And then it forces your brain, an organ designed for human society, to operate in a vacuum. So the brain does what it always does when faced with unbearable emptiness. It creates company. At some point in the drift, when his body was failing and his will had been tested beyond anything a normal life demands, Maximo later claimed something extraordinary. He said Jesus appeared to him, not as a metaphor, not as a distant idea, as a presence, an encounter, a moment of divine intrusion into a world that had become brutally godless. Now, to the outside world, such a claim invites debate. Some will hear it as miracle. Others will call it hallucination. An exhausted mind generating what it most needs: comfort, direction, meaning. But here is the truth that matters in a survival story. It doesn't matter what the label is, because in open ocean survival, belief is not philosophy. Belief is fuel. Maximo needed something stronger than muscle to keep living. He needed a reason powerful enough to withstand the daily humiliation of thirst, hunger, and drift. He needed something that could stand in the place of certainty, and faith, whether divine or psychological, became that engine. It became twist number 2. Because the mind that had been turning against him suddenly became his ally again. In the aftermath of that claimed encounter, Maximo's prayers changed. They were no longer only desperate requests. They became declarations. Like a man who had found a thread in darkness and refused to let go, he began treating each day as a duty. Survive until sunset, survive through the night, survive until the next rain, survive until a ship appears. And when no ship appeared, when the horizon remained mercilessly empty, he still survived, because he had reframed the struggle. It was no longer just about his body holding out. It was about meaning holding up his body. That is a crucial and often ignored reality of extreme survival. The human being does not survive only because of calories or hydration. He survives because of narrative, because of purpose, because of the stubborn refusal to let suffering be pointless. But the ocean does not allow hope without payment. The more Maximo leaned into faith, the more the storm inside his mind fought back. Doubt surfaced in brutal waves. Why haven't you been found? Why are you still here? Why do you think you matter in this endless water? In the worst moments, he may have felt a terrifying temptation to stop trying, to stop thinking, to stop being. And that temptation is the true predator at sea. Not sharks, not storms. The predator is exhaustion whispering, "Rest forever." Maximo resisted, sometimes through prayer, sometimes through sheer anger, sometimes through the simple primal instinct that refuses extinction. He would grip the rail, look up at the sky, and speak words that were less religion and more rebellion. Not today. And as the days dragged on, the Pacific continued its silent work. It continued pushing him, continued starving him, continued isolating him. But now the ocean had a new opponent. Not the fisherman, not the body. The ocean was fighting the one force it cannot fully measure. A human being who still believes his life has meaning. And that belief, whether miracle, hallucination, or both, kept Maximo from becoming what so many others become in open water: quiet disappearance. Because if the body is the first battlefield, then this was the second. And Maximo was still standing. Barely, but still. And then everything changed. By now, Maximo existed in a state that barely resembled living. This was not survival as people imagine it. Active, alert, fighting moment to moment. This was survival reduced to maintenance, to preservation, to keeping a failing system from shutting down completely. His body had crossed into a different phase of starvation, one where hunger no longer screamed, because screaming costs energy. Instead, it whispered through weakness, through shaking hands, through the way his legs felt unreliable beneath him. Standing too long made his vision dim at the edges. Sitting up too quickly sent waves of dizziness through his skull. He learned to move slowly, carefully, deliberately. Every motion now required a calculation. Is this necessary? Is this worth the cost? Because effort was no longer renewable. It was finite. The sun continued its daily punishment. Without shade, his skin darkened, cracked, peeled. Salt embedded itself into every wound, every crease. His eyes burned constantly, irritated by glare and dehydration. Blinking felt dry, mechanical, like parts wearing down without lubrication. And the water problem had become critical. Rain no longer came reliably. When clouds appeared, they teased, thickening, darkening, only to pass without releasing anything. Each missed rain felt personal, like rejection. When rain did come, Maximo reacted with a focus that bordered on desperation. Containers were positioned instantly. cloth spread wide, hands trembling as he guided runoff, careful not to spill a single drop. He drank slowly, always slowly, even when his body begged for more. Because thirst lies. It promises relief and delivers collapse. There were moments, quiet, dangerous moments, when he thought about the salt water beneath him, about how close it was, about how easy it would be to take just one real drink. Those thoughts scared him, not because he didn't know better, but because knowing better didn't silence them. That is how dehydration works. It doesn't convince you logically, it seduces you physically. Maximo fought it by ritual, by rule, by stubborn discipline. Saltwater was poison, no exceptions, no negotiations. Still, weakness deepened. His hands lost strength first. Fingers stiffened. Grip weakened. The fishing line felt heavier than it should have. Hooks slipped. Small mistakes multiplied, not because he was careless, but because his body was running out of precision. Precision requires fuel. Fuel requires food. And the ocean was no longer providing consistently. Some days he caught nothing. On those days, he lay still for long periods, conserving heat, conserving thought. His stomach felt empty, but it was the rest of him that suffered more. The dull ache in muscles, the fog in his head, the way effort felt disproportionate to reward. At night, the cold became brutal. Without body fat, without dry clothes, without insulation, the wind cut through him. He curled inward, knees to chest, arms wrapped around himself, trying to trap what little warmth remained. Sleep came in broken shards, 10 minutes here, 20 there, punctuated by shivering and pain. And in those half-dream states, reality softened. Memories arrived uninvited. Voices he hadn't heard in months sounded close, almost present. Familiar kitchens, familiar laughter, the smell of cooked food so vivid it made his mouth water. Sometimes he woke convinced he had heard someone call his name. Those moments were dangerous, because hallucination is comforting, and comfort is tempting. Maximo learned to test reality with touch. He would grip the rail, press his palm against the deck, feel the vibration of water against wood, anchor himself in sensation. This is real. This is now. Stay here. But the line between dreaming and waking thinned anyway. Sometimes he lost track of where his body ended and the boat began. Sometimes he felt like he was shrinking, dissolving into the space around him. The ocean no longer felt like something he was in. It felt like something he was becoming part of. And that terrified him more than death. Because death would be an end. This felt like erasure. Still, he continued. Because continuation had become instinct. He no longer asked why he was surviving. He only asked how long he could. By this stage, Maximo understood something few people ever confront honestly. Survival is not heroic. It is monotonous. It is humiliating. It is exhausting. It is a daily decision to endure discomfort without the promise of reward. And yet, he endured. Because somewhere deep beneath hunger, beneath weakness, beneath doubt, there was still a pulse of refusal. A part of him that rejected the idea of vanishing without witness. A part that insisted his story could not end as a statistic swallowed by water. That refusal became his final resource. Not strength, not food, not water. Refusal. And the Pacific, vast and indifferent, continued to carry him. Carried him through empty days, through burning afternoons, through freezing nights, through a stretch of time so long that survival itself began to feel improbable. And somewhere far beyond his sight, beyond the curve of the horizon, beyond the limits of expectation, a line of fate was tightening, a route intersecting another route, a moving speck crossing another moving speck, a moment building without announcement. Maximo could not see it, could not sense it, could not hope for it anymore. All he could do was remain alive long enough for chance to arrive. And as he lay on the deck, too weak to sit upright for long, eyes half closed against the glare, lips cracked and unmoving, his chest rose and fell with shallow determination. Not today. Not yet. Because sometimes survival is nothing more than staying present long enough for the impossible to notice you. And the ocean, unaware, unfeeling, kept carrying him forward. toward an ending it had not chosen. The ocean does not announce rescue. It does not signal that mercy is approaching. It does not soften its surface or part its horizon like a curtain. On the Pacific, salvation arrives the same way death arrives, quietly. By March 2025, Maximo Gatton Napa Castro had become something that barely resembled the man who left Peru in December. His face had hardened into angles. His skin was sun-scarred and salt-burned. His eyes, still alive, carried the exhausted stare of someone who had spent too long negotiating with silence. The boat was still floating, but only just. A drifting artifact, a splinter of humanity clinging to the surface of an enormous, indifferent planet. This is what many people don't understand. The hardest part of survival isn't enduring pain. It's enduring the possibility that you will endure all of it and still not be found, because a boat is small, a man is smaller, and the ocean is a continent that moves. That morning, whatever morning meant after 95 days, the sea was deceptively calm. The sky was pale. The water rolled in long, lazy swells, gentle enough to disguise the fact that they had once tried to kill him. The Pacific looked almost civilized. Almost. Maximo lay low, conserving strength. He had learned not to waste movement, not to waste breath. His body was so depleted that even sitting upright felt like a chore his muscles had to debate. And then, something changed. Not in the weather, in the sound. A faint vibration, so subtle that it could have been a trick of wind, a false hope, another hallucination constructed by a starving brain. But it persisted. The low, rhythmic pulse of an engine, far away, but real. Maximo lifted his head. His eyes narrowed against the glare. At first he saw nothing, just water, just distance. Then, there, a shape on the horizon, a darker line interrupting the smooth curve of the sea. For a few seconds, his mind refused to accept it. After weeks of mirages, after countless times the horizon had lied to him, the brain becomes cautious. It stops trusting its own eyes. It protects itself from disappointment. But the shape grew. Not quickly, slowly, like a truth approaching. Maximo pushed himself upright, trembling. His heart didn't race with excitement. His body didn't have the resources for excitement. It beat with urgency, like a warning bell ringing from deep inside. He looked again. The shape was unmistakable now. A vessel, a fishing patrol, later widely reported as Ecuadorian. And here is the terrifying part. The part nobody wants to imagine. If that vessel had been 1 degree farther north or south, if its route had been slightly different, if the glare had been stronger, if the lookout had blinked at the wrong moment, Maximo would have remained invisible. Not because he wasn't there, but because the ocean makes the human body statistically irrelevant. Rescue at sea is often not about heroism. It is about alignment. A rare, accidental intersection between human movement and human need. The patrol moved closer, still distant but undeniably on a path that could pass near him. Maximo tried to signal. What did he even have left to signal with? There was no flare, no bright beacon, no radio call, no engine to create motion or smoke, only his body, only his will, only a boat that looked like debris. He raised his arms, or tried to. Even that simple act felt like lifting stone. He waved weakly, repeatedly, turning his entire remaining life into a single message. I am here. The vessel drew nearer. Now he could see details, hard lines of metal, the structure of a working ship, movement on deck, human silhouettes. And then, the moment that separated life from death, someone noticed, someone pointed. Someone decided this was not just driftwood or wreckage. This was a boat, a small boat, with a man inside it. They changed course. The vessel angled toward him. Maximo watched it approach like a man watching the gates of the afterlife open. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. Not from salt this time, but from something else he had not allowed himself to feel in months. Release. The ship arrived alongside. Voices reached him. Real voices, human language cutting through the ocean's long silence like a knife cutting a rope. Hands extended. Strong hands. Working hands. The hands of men who had no idea they were reaching into a near impossible story. When they pulled him up, Maximo's body moved as if it belonged to another world. He was light. Too light. A man reduced to the bare minimum required to still be called alive. His legs barely held. His arms barely lifted. But his eyes held the kind of intensity you only see in people who have stared directly into extinction. The patrol members looked at him with shock because they weren't just seeing a survivor. They were seeing a contradiction. They were seeing a man who should not have existed after 95 days. And then came the cold confirmation of distance, reported widely afterward. He was found roughly 388 miles from where he started, a number that sounds measurable on land, but at sea, it is a verdict. 388 miles of water, of drift, of invisible currents dragging him away from rescue routes and toward disappearance. Yet here he was, alive, a ghost boat carrying a living man. Maximo was placed on deck, given water, carefully because bodies this depleted can fail even during rescue. Given attention, given the first true human care he'd felt in months. And in that moment, surrounded by people, engines, structure, order, he looked out at the ocean. It was still there, blue-gray, endless, calm, as if it had done nothing, as if it had not spent 3 months trying to erase him. That is the final insult of the Pacific. It attacks you, and then it pretends it never touched you. Maximo survived, but the deeper truth was this. He didn't just escape death, he escaped being forgotten. Because the ocean doesn't only kill bodies, it kills stories. And now Maximo's story was no longer drifting alone in the Pacific. Now it had witnesses. Now it had a voice. Now it belonged to the world again. And then everything changed. Exactly. The rescue is only the start of a new ordeal. One that is internal, slow, and often invisible. Maximo's survival wasn't just about the ocean or his body. It was about reclaiming his humanity, his sense of self, and the meaning that kept him alive when everything else was stripped away. What really stands out in this last chapter is the duality of relief and grief. He is saved physically, yet emotionally and psychologically, the ocean has left its mark. The 388 miles he drifted aren't just a statistic. They are a measure of how close extinction came, how fragile life really is in the open sea. And the final twist, the understanding that being spared is not being safe, gives the story a lingering tension. The ocean doesn't just test skill. It tests narrative, hope, faith, and perception. That's what makes survival stories like Maximo's so profound. The real battle continues even after rescue, in the slow reconstruction of life and mind. If you want, I can help craft a closing passage or narration that perfectly conveys this after-rescue reflection, something cinematic, reflective, and haunting. So the story ends with both triumph and a chill reminder of the ocean's indifference. Do you want me to do that?